Today we're going to teach you all about the 997s. I'm Justin.
And I am Aaron, and this is Cousin Randy.
And before we go too much farther, please subscribe for more great content like this and stick around because you're going to learn some stuff about 997s.
And you're going to find out what kind of 997 you want to buy and what kind maybe you don't want to buy. All right, Randy, so thank you for joining us today. Randy is a 997 aficionado here. So today we've got all the 997s here. So tell us about the generations of the 997, starting with this one right here.
Okay, the generations basically were the 997.1 and the 997.2. The .1 ran from 2005 to 2008. This is an example of a .1. It happens to be a GT3, which is the top of the line. But then in 2009, we went to the .2 car, which is this car, which is a .2 GTS, and my car, which is a .2 base car.
Okay, so we've got the 997.1, which is the continuation of the 911 from the 996.2. So when we went from 996.2 to 997.1, we could see the clever continuation of the generation years there. But what changed from the 996.2 to the 997.1?
Okay, the biggest changes was we had a slight change in the engine, the styling of the car, and what most people didn't like about the 996.2 or the .1 was the interior. A totally upgraded interior when we went to the 997.1.
I think the headlights were a bit of a problem on the 996s as well.
Absolutely.
So those were changed as well. Now, there was another problem with the 996, and every 996 video, every 996 forum, they are always talking about it, and that is the IMS bearing. So when we went from the 996.2 to the 997.1, did Porsche get rid of the IMS bearing problem?
The 997.1 still had the IMS bearing. In the early 05 cars, the bearing was still the same as in the 996s. Now this bearing had about a 7 to 8% failure rate, but the good thing about that bearing was it was replaceable. You could take it out and you could put in a upgraded aftermarket bearing and you could fix the problem. Then when they went to the 2006 to 2008 models, and even some of the late 2005s, Porsche actually increased the size of the bearing and made it a more robust bearing, and that basically dropped the failure rate down to around 1 to 2%.
But 1 to 2% is not nothing. So that's one thing to keep in mind as you're looking at these different cars. Now, just like the 996, there is a variance in the engine that you get depending on the level of car that you get. So the turbos, the GTs, those all have the Metzger engine, the same great solid engine. And if you want to know more about IMS bearing replacements, we do have a video about that. All right, one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about this different motor configuration, IMS bearings and all that business, that the same is still true of the 997.1s. The turbo cars, the GT cars, those all have the Metzger engine, which is a solid engine. But in the end, Porsche decided in the 997.2 to get rid of all this talk altogether. So what engine do we have in the 997.2?
Okay, in the 997.2, which started in 2009, they created what was called the 9A1 engine. This was not just a slight change to the M97 like a bolt-on power kit or something like that. This was a fully redesigned engine. The 9A1 engine has no IMS bearing at all. The 9A1 engine has direct fuel injection. The 9A1 engine has more horsepower. So basically, the 9A1 engine was better all the way across the board. It increased the horsepower in the base model from 325 to 345, and it increased the horsepower in the S model from 355 to 385.
So cosmetically, there's very little difference between the .1s and the .2. There's no major differences there. However, from the 996 to the 97, the big changes are all motor configuration, drivetrain. Tell us about the difference in the transmission in the 997.
Okay, in the 997, the transmission was a Tiptronic transmission all the way up until 2009. In 2009, when they went to the 9A1, they said, we might as well fix the transmission too, and they went to the PDK transmission. The PDK transmission, much more advanced, It's a dual clutch transmission, and it's a very good racing transmission.
Absolutely. So the 996, one of its big problems is everybody hates that Tiptronic. In the 997.1, you still see it, but in the 997.2, we moved to the PDK, the modern PDK system. So we talked about motor configurations, but this transmission jump from the Tiptronic transmission to the PDK transmission between dot 1 and dot 2 is one of the largest configurations differences between a single generation's jump from 1 to 2. Out here we have 3 different versions of the 997. We've got the base, the GTS, and the GT3. But Randy, what were all of the trim levels that were available in the 997?
Okay, they had the base model, they had the S, they had the GTS, they had the Turbo S, they had the GT2, the GT3, and the GT3 RS.
So that is a lot that's available, and actually the GTS was the first GTS 911 that had been released. So the 997 GTS is the first of the GTS. All right, so that was all. There's a lot of them available. A lot of the names that we're used to seeing from the trim levels were available in the 997. A couple of unique pieces of the 997. The GTS was the first GTS release for the 911. So that was your first generation of the GTS. Also, if you want a Turbo S in manual, you are not going to find it in a 997. The Turbo S was only available in the 997.2, and it was only available in the PDK. So if that's what you're looking for, you're going to need just a run-of-the-mill turbo to get that manual transmission out of a 997 turbo.
Exactly.
As usual, Aaron disappears when it's time for the hard stuff, so I'm gonna help you figure out, with Randy's help, which one are you gonna buy, dot 1 or dot 2, or are you gonna look at some of the higher end models, GT3s, GTSs, so on. So Randy, before we talk about which model someone should specifically buy, let's talk in general about why someone should be looking at 997s today.
Okay, the 997 is generally looked at as the last small analog Porsche. And many people believe, investment-wise, that it could be the next 964 or 993, because they aren't making any more of them.
Right.
And, you know, the prices could vary. They're already kind of on the high side, especially for the dot 2 on up into the specialty models,
Yep.
but they could skyrocket sometime in the future.
And a lot of these cars have been lost to everyday life. So the newest 997 you can pick up now is nearly 15 years old. So it is a good car to look for. They aren't making any more. There's been plenty that have been wrecked, tracked, all that sort of thing. So finding a good one is becoming harder and harder and harder. So we explained the difference between the dot 1 and dot 2. We've talked about some of the models, but when you're buying one of these cars, what are the big things that you want to look for? Aside from the standard Porsche thing, you always want the best records you can find. But what are you looking for that might stop you from picking one of these cars up?
If you're looking at the dot 1 series, obviously bore scoring and IMS. You want to make sure the IMS has been taken care of, or it has one of the new larger bearings, such as in the late 05 up to the 08 series. Now, another big item is bore scoring. You can very easily check and do a bore scope when you get a PPI, and you can find out if there is any bore scoring in those cylinders. So I would highly recommend doing that in the dot 1 series. In the dot 2 is a little bit more bulletproof. They've kind of worked out all the issues from the dot 1, and you basically just need to look at the general things you look at with any car on the dot 2, other than cosmetic conditions and mileage and things like that.
Mileage doesn't matter as much on these cars though, does it?
It doesn't, other than
From an
people's
investment
perceived
standpoint.
value.
Yeah, from an investment standpoint, but in general, these are solid cars.
You can put a lot of miles on these cars.
You and I have gone on road trips plenty of times, and they are wonderful to drive, so that's the other reason you should buy one, even aside from the investment potential. Now, when it comes to the GT3s too, you want to know some of the things that people talked about with those. In the dot 1s, you had a coolant line problem. They've probably been replaced or repaired by this point, but if you want to ask that owner, have you done the coolant lines? In the dot 2s, the rocker bolts would back out. Obviously, if that's still happening, you're probably not buying that car. But those are the things that you hear about these cars that you want to be aware of. Make sure that when you're shopping these cars, you're asking those questions as well. So dot 1 or dot 2, that's kind of up to you really, right?
It is up to you. It depends on your wallet. The dot 2s, they didn't make many of them. They're rare, especially if you want a manual. You're going to pay more money for them, maybe up to 20, 30,000 more. But if you want a .1, you can get into one for less money, but you have to do your due diligence on the PPI.
And then you told me you looked for this car for several years, right?
It took me 2 years to find this model.
Because some of the colors are rarer than others when it comes to investment. Now, we're screwing this up because we have two very rare colors here together that you don't see very often. But in general, if you're looking for that investment one, look at the color charts. So if you're looking for a certain color, you can kind of figure out what you want. Look on renbo.com and we'll link to that down below. But that'll tell you what the rarer colors are and what was available in what year as well, right?
That's correct.
So between the .1 and .2 in general, that's really personal preference. Cosmetics are very similar. Performance, a little better on the .2s, but you're not going to be sad with either one. But let's talk about that investment part of it again. You've got your higher trim level cars, your GTS, you've got your GT3s, your turbos, and so on. If you're investing, that's really what you're looking for. Although I will say again, I don't think any 997 is a bad investment at this point. However, let's talk specifically about some differences if you're going to buy a GT3. I think if you're going to put money into a very expensive car, a GT3 997 is the one. .1 or .2 is the question. So here's the answer. The biggest difference is going to be in the motors and how they perform, not from a power standpoint as much as kind of how they're set up. In the .1, it's a lighter flywheel. It spins up faster. It's going to feel revier and racier. That's the 3.6. The 3.8 is not going to spin up as fast, but you've got more torque and you've got more oomph to it. Both are going to drive amazingly. It depends on what kind of driving experience you want. That .1 is going to feel a little more raw than the .2. Although I'll say this GTS .2, if I push the right button, it feels raw too. So don't leave out the GTSs. These are incredible cars to invest in right now as well because the GTS is the best of both worlds, right, Randy?
That's correct.
You hit the button and you've got a GT3, but I still got stereo and all the good stuff. Not that these don't, but this is a much more reasonable car to drive around every day.
Kind of a sweet spot.
It is the sweet spot. And this, frankly, might be the sweetest spot of all the 997s, the GTS .2. Not to mention, this was the first GTS. There's lots of GTSs now. You got GTS Caymans and GTS Cayennes, but this is the GTS. Now, fun facts about the GTS. Most of them came with PDK. You could get a standard, but PDK was, they were showing it off. There are some four-wheel, all-wheel drive GTSs, but the original intention was for it to be rear-wheel drive. Really cool car, really special. If you can find one of these, I'd really suggest it. But again, I don't think you're going wrong with any 997 from an investment standpoint. Now, I assume if you're watching this video, you have an idea of what you want to spend, but let's help you get realistic. Randy, what kind of price range are we looking at from a .1 base? Where do we start?
Okay. The .1 base, you're going to run probably starting around 40,000. It really depends on the mileage and the condition and if it's a manual. But that can go up to probably 50 or 55,000 if it's a really nice car and a manual. Now the .2s can go very high. If they're the correct build, like this car is a very rare build. This is a speed yellow manual coupe that only has 42,000 miles on it. This car could very easily sell for $75,000. So a lot of it depends on the options, the rarity of the build, and the condition.
And I would suggest that you do your research if you're an investor. If you're a driver, go get the best one you can find. But if you're investing, look for the right colors, look for the right options. The manual's always going to be worth more than the automatic, and a coupe is always going to be worth more than a cab. It's strange because the cabs cost more originally, right?
They used to say when the top goes down, the price goes up. It's the opposite for these cars.
Absolutely. Then we get into the I guess you call them halo cars, the turbos, the GTs, and so on. You're probably starting at around 100 for one of those with the right miles on it. GTS, again, sweet spot, you're probably 80, 85 for a really nice GTS, which is right between those two. And I think, again, limited numbers, really great from an investment standpoint. So, is this a buyer's guide? I guess, more or less. It's a video about how much we love 997s and all the little things about it. Should you buy one? Absolutely. Should you invest in one? I don't have a license, so I can't tell you that. But absolutely, if you want to enjoy yourself, you should buy one of these cars today. If you're watching this video 5 years from now, I'm so sorry you missed the boat, but that's what's going to happen. Thank you for watching. thank you, Cousin Randy, for coming out.
You got it, buddy.
And we will see you next time. So thanks for watching it. And if a 997 is not your speed, go check out the 996 video we made. Also great cars, a little bit more value for the dollar.